Alex Kack, and I'm joined today by comedian Henry Phillips. Henry, how are you doing?
Hey Alex, how's it going? Doing good.
It's going well. Been starting all of these the last couple of days with the same question because it feels necessary to ask, which is really, how are you doing? Are you okay? Are you
Um,
safe?
yeah, I always joke that comics are particularly equipped for this type of a situation. I've definitely used coffee filters as toilet paper before, and I know how to spend days all by myself and keep myself occupied. So far, it doesn't feel that much different. There's a little uncertainty though, and as a as a guy who's always been fascinated by economics, it's interesting to watch because I can say to myself, "Oh, I can always put out my videos on Patreon, or I can come up with clever way. I can monetize my YouTube stuff or whatever, or sell merchandise or whatever." But the thing that everybody needs to remember is that if other people out there don't have their jobs, then they can't buy my shit, So that's the part that's concerning, in the future. And we've seen that with comedy clubs too. I remember back in 2008 when that whole crash happened. Um, the ripple effect was tremendous. I was going to clubs, like the one in Dayton, Ohio, Wiley's, which was always one of my favorites, and they got hit really hard. And it sort of dawned on me. It's like, oh yeah, I might be fine to go to a comedy club and do my comedy, but if they don't have a job, they can't show up, or if they have to save money or whatever. And the same with film festivals. All those luxury items just sort of are the first thing to go out of the window. So there's a little uncertainty, but the day to day has been pretty good. I'm growing a quarantine beard, which I'm excited about. Never had a beard before.
Really?
Yeah.
Uh, it's a bucket list item right there.
Yeah, a little. It's really, this is the perfect opportunity to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like you've got to entertain yourself like somehow, and
Yeah,
yeah, like weird facial hair decisions are like the best way to do it. I
yeah.
almost shaved off the mustache the other day.
Ah, interesting. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm glad I didn't because I saw some pictures of myself without it, and I was like,
yeah. Even
you
in
know.
quarantine, you don't. But yeah, yeah. The mustache is sort of like a glimmer of hope of the future, going back into the outside world. It's like
Yeah.
there was a thing that I saw as a kid, one of those little things that somebody would have like on their desk or something, a little saying, and it said, "Even if I knew that the world would end tomorrow, I would still plant an apple tree today." So I guess with your mustache, it's a little bit like, even though the world is ending, I'm still keeping the mustache in case we all go out again soon.
Yeah, in
I
case
like
there's a
that.
moment to socialize. I
Yeah.
mean, the reality is, I just don't want to see myself in the mirror without it anymore.
Yeah.
Like, who the hell is that guy?
Oh yeah.
So, how long have you been a road comic for? I mean, how long have you been
Um,
touring and performing?
in let's see, I guess about 93. I uh, I started out as a musician, and I had all these songs that I used to like to write, and then I got nowhere with it, and I was very frustrated, and I wound up going to college at UCLA to get a degree in political science, and I kind of gave up on all of anything in the arts at all. And then during the last year of that, I remember going to this place called the Cinegrill, which was at the Roosevelt Hotel, and they had an open mic night. And for whatever reason, this guy who was hosting the open mic night, who later wound up becoming a really good friend of mine, just said, "Hey, does anybody have anything that they want to do?" And I had this ridiculous song that I used to do to make my musician friends laugh. And I was kind of drunk, and I was just like, "Yeah, you know what? I'm going to go up there and do this song." And I did the song, and it just killed. And I felt that, whatever they say, that bug or whatever, the itch, and I was like, I got to get more of that. And so I started going around to open mic nights. I went to this place called the Upfront Comedy Club, and they had me every week, and it was just that one song, but I was loving it, and I was meeting all these new people. So that was about 93, 94, and then eventually I wound up getting an actual act together. The road comic part didn't come until 99. See, when you're coming up in LA at that time anyway, the whole concept of the road was sort of a fantasy. You know, it's like any place that you were going to go was going to require air travel, unless you drove to like Bakersfield or Riverside or Barstow or something. But you know, if you were going to go to Indiana or Ohio or anything, that was going to require air travel, and then you'd have to have an offer for a sort of a professional gig at that point, because you know. So um, it was a long time of developing the act in LA, and until finally in '99, Doug Stanhope took me out as his opening act to Houston, the Laugh Stop in Houston, which is a historically amazing comedy club. You know, it's not there anymore, but and then that just opened up a whole door for me, because then I started, and Doug also took me to Minneapolis and a couple of other clubs, and then I became a professional road comic from about 2000 to about maybe about 3 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, and then I'm just like wanting to do other things. So I my stand-up comedy has gone down to maybe being about 25% of my life, you know, where it used
You
to
know,
be
I had actually wanted to ask you about your relationship with stand-up, because I know in past interviews you've credited in a lot of ways your career or the start of it in a professional sense to him. And you know, for me, being a comic, or at least once upon a time a comic in Tucson, Arizona, Stanhope holds a very like storied and mythic place
oh
in our kind of,
yeah,
yeah, in our kind of lore.
in LA too. It's pretty much two totally different places. Yeah, no, that's true.
He, you know, I don't know him well. I've met him a few times. He probably wouldn't even remember it. But the one thing that always struck me about him and the stories about him is, I mean, how great he was to people who were up and coming.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I mean, there are shows that I booked at venues here that were literally because like he had referred a comic from someplace to another comic here who referred them to me to like get them booked, or like I wound up being the host. And I met friends in this like very weird roundabout way through this guy living in Bisbee that I never met. And I feel like that everyone seems to have a story about him like that. Do
Oh
you still
yeah.
keep a relationship with him?
Yeah, less and less. I mean, just because it's hard to get out to Bisbee the older I get, you know. But that's pretty much the only way I'm gonna hang out with him. But yeah, we back in 2012 we did a whole tour of the UK, which was like 38 cities, and that was unbelievable. I mean, you know, the guy's responsible for experiences that I would have never had, you know, and so yeah, yeah. But he's definitely a comics. I mean, a comics comic, obviously, but also just a comics. What's the word? Like ally or whatever, you know. I mean, I remember really quickly one time he was telling me about how this club owner, I don't remember who it was sort of. I mean, Doug was also he is a successful comic, so he's not some guy who's struggling. And I guess that this club owner read Doug the wrong way, and thought, oh, this is a no filter type guy. I'm going to talk to him about how fun it is for me to fuck with the comics that come to my club. I've got the shittiest condo. I've basically got them living in filth. And Doug was so confused about why that guy would think that would be something that Doug was going to be on board with, because that's where he's from. That's his people. And he pretty much lashed out at the guy. Just like, what the fuck's wrong with you? You know? But yeah, no, it's very clear what side he's on in terms of anything comic related. And there's tons of other stories about it. You can look up Sean Rouse in South Bend, Indiana is one of the best ones, you know, but there's so many of them. But yeah, no, he's a real advocate, you know.
Yeah, I mean, he really he's one of those guys who like seemed to have achieved success, and then like he had no interest in like hoarding it or pigeonholing it. He
Yeah.
wanted to just use it to push other people he thought were talented, which is like one of the coolest things I think I've
Oh
ever been
yeah,
able to witness.
amazing. Yeah, I mean, I I almost feel like it's a cliche when I talk about it because he's put so much stuff out there. He's got books and all this other stuff, but it's the real deal, you know. The what he's done for comedian. Hold on, there's Matt trying to break into my session here. Just give me like 3 seconds. I'm gonna give him the message. I'll tell you about the cat in a second here. But,
And bring the cat in.
well, I could. Sorry, I'm moved in with my fiance, and she had a cat, and so I inherited the cat, and now all of a sudden I'm a cat person. So it's really weird.
You know, I mean, that's how it works. I have a cat from a relationship that ended 8 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like,
yeah, that's a constant reminder. Yeah.
yeah.
But sorry about that. Yeah. So going back, yeah, no, I mean, all day long we could talk about Doug and his stories, but most of them are all out there in the public. But yeah, he really pretty much everything that you've heard about him is true. I think pretty rare that I'll hear something that's a complete BS story. There might be some exaggerations here and there.
I mean, that's true of any legend, right?
Yeah.
You mentioned the kind of huge body of work that he has out, but you have a big body of work out yourself.
Well, yeah.
You've done. I mean, everything from acting to comedy specials. You have one thing I wanted to touch on. You've written a couple of musicals.
Oh, yeah.
And Chips, I believe. Is that correct?
Chips the musical. If anybody wants to hear it, it's on Spotify or any of those things that you stream. I've co-written 2 musicals with my buddy Rick Bataya, who's an amazing comedic actor, and he pretty much writes the book and sort of sings a lot of the melodies, and then I'm on the piano, and we eventually wrote them and produced them. And one of them was Blake the musical, about Robert Blake, and that one I don't think you can stream, unfortunately, but I'll have to fix that. But and then Chips the musical, and yeah, I've always had a love-hate relationship with musicals because they're so easy to laugh at, you know, like not laugh with, but laugh at. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like Paint Your Wagon with Clint Eastwood or whatever. It's just like all that kind of, it's so easy to kill. Like when you look at Cats, you know, it's like, these are like indestructible people like Judi Dench or, you know, all these people. And it's just such a marvelous piece of crap. You know, it's like, it's so easy to make fun of. And yet I like the music. I don't know. I just have always been a fan. I think the music for West Side Story is some of the best music that's ever been written in our entire history. I think it's amazing. And yet watching it is just painful, you know, to watch these like gang members dancing around and stuff like that. So South Park, I think, did a great job with the Book of Mormon. I think it's great. The only thing that leaves me wanting when I watch that musical, I mean, this I think will express my point a little bit, is that they're hiding the music a little bit behind, oh, we're just making fun of this. But I want to hear more legit, you know, because all of the music sounds like a parody of some famous song from that genre, but none of it to me sounds like West Side Story quality music. So I don't know. I always have a hard time deciding whether are we making fun of this genre or are we actually really trying to do it. I guess anything like that stand-up, you know, it's like it's so easy to laugh at bad stand-up, and it's a fine line between what's good and what's bad, you know?
Oh, absolutely. And I mean, it's sometimes it can be difficult to figure out. I think especially when you're trying to craft a joke, when you are doing so sincerely, or when you're simply, you know, making the joke a parody of the genre itself. Yeah. And that's true of, I think, any type of joke writing in any format.
Yeah, a friend of mine, Brian Hennigan, actually, who's Doug's manager, who's a great conversationalist, and he brought up this quote from Brian Eno, who apparently one time said, "It took me." He said he doesn't think that people like music ironically. He thinks that they like it or they don't like it, but they have to hide it. And he said it for years. It took him years to be able to admit to his peers that he liked ABBA. Because he's like, I can't like ABBA, you know, I'm a hip, you know, big time producer or whatever, and that's corny music. but he legitimately liked it. And it finally had to have a certain sense of confidence before he could tell people this. But that's why when you see things like South Park and they're doing the Come Sail Away Styx song, we're all laughing at it because what a ridiculous, hokey song it is. But we all kind of like the song too. But now it's being packaged in a way that we feel okay laughing at it. So I don't know. It's just sort of a weird thing. It's like we can only like stuff that's corny if it's presented to us as though we're making fun of it. But inside, we actually think it's a pretty cool song.
That's what's always like. I feel like that's like the whole like hipster thing that happened in the last 2 decades was like you had all these like young white kids putting stuff out there as like an ironic thing.
Yeah,
and I like this ironically, or I'm listening to this or I'm watching this because I think it's bad. And it's like, no, you fucking don't. Like,
yeah, you actually like it. Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, totally.
Look,
people that always wanted to wear something, now they can wear it because they say that they're doing it as a joke.
Yeah. I like it was so weird for me because I had like I think just like I had an ex who one time said that it wasn't that I had bad taste, it's just that my taste was so broad that it always encompassed some awful, like objectively bad stuff. But I remember that, especially when I was younger, trying to be like, oh, this thing's a guilty pleasure, like I'm hiding it, like, blah, blah, blah. And then like, there's got to be a point where you just stop and you're just like, no, like that fucking Smash Mouth album, it's like that slaps. Like I want that on vinyl. I'll listen to that thing all the way through. It's fucking good.
Totally. Yeah. No, I've always been the same way. I've liked a lot of stuff that's extremely ridiculous. Air Supply. Pretty much anything written by that guy who wrote Jim Steinman, who wrote some of their songs. He also wrote all of Meatloaf's songs, and it's totally over the top. And that's kind of what we try to do with the musicals too, is just try to create that thing. But yeah, I mean, it's not too far from Queen, which everybody openly admits that they like, but that's very melodramatic and very, so.
Yeah, it is. It's weird to figure out where the line of melodrama from being like high art to like corny is.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the same with stand-up too. I mean, how many times have you seen that one comic that goes on at the end of the night that all of the comics can't wait to watch because it's such a train wreck, and it's like, that's the one that you want to watch. But now, is that guy a good or woman a good comic, or are they do they suck? It's hard to say. I mean, they're kind of doing the job, which is making everybody want to watch them, so I don't know.
We had this guy that was coming to open mics in Tucson for a while, maybe like 5 years ago. And like I thought he was like the best comic in our scene for the like couple of months he showed up, but everything he did was like in character. He would work out these like 3, 5, and 10-minute sets that were entirely in character. And he gave no one a heads up that he was doing this when he first showed up. Like he signed up under his name, went up, and you thought it was like just this train wreck happening. And it was like, I mean, it was just a thing of beauty. He like the first couple times he showed up doing like slam poetry, and it was horrid. And he had these like tirades in between about how like the like comics and like the like open mic crowd were like,
oh man,
basically too lowbrow for him. And it was like really alienating to some people. And I remember sitting there watching this, like, this whole fucking thing is scripted.
Yeah.
And I got talking to him and I realized it was. And he came back with a couple different characters. I mean, he would get the biggest laughs of the night. People were laughing at him. But they were laughing at a person. It was like this almost Kaufman-esque shit. And I think he just showed up for a couple months and disappeared. But it was such a train wreck to watch. And it's so, I think it can be difficult with those types of performers to figure out when objectively like they're trying to be sincere and doing a bad job versus when like that actually is their point.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how do you figure that out from the audience?
Yeah, I always tried to emulate, like, as I started out in music open mic nights, so I would watch a lot of music open micers. And the one thing that I noticed about them that was different from the open micer comics was that they took themselves really seriously. And there would always be this long intro for the song because they only get to do one song, but there wasn't really a time limit because you can't say, okay, you have 4 minutes. What if somebody's song is longer than that? So they would just look at this as an opportunity. The talking part before the song was an opportunity to just sort of have a captive audience listening. And I'd see people just go, this is a song about, sometimes when I'm lying awake at night, I'll get these voices in my head and they'll be like this really high voice it sounds like a woman screaming. I guess you guys have had that and everybody's like, nah, there's something wrong with you. But that's where I got a lot of the beginning parts of my act, because I was like, I'm trying to make fun of that person that doesn't realize that everybody's actually laughing at them as opposed to with them. And I've carried that through everything that I do. I mean, now I'm doing my web series, which is a kitchen series, and I'm basically doing the same thing. I'm just sort of like trying to imitate the people that you see for real doing these things, and I can never get it, I think, as funny as when you watch the real thing, but I'm trying to get it there.
It's Henry's Kitchen. That's the name of the
Yeah.
show, right?
Yeah, and it started from me just going on YouTube, legitimately trying to learn how to cook something because I wanted to start getting healthy. This was like about 10 years ago, and man, it was so beautiful to see all of these videos. I think nowadays the way the algorithm works or whatever, it's people's professional ones all sort of pop up and it's harder to find these things. But in the beginning, you'd watch the one video from like allrecipes.com or whatever. And then on the right side was just this glorious list of people, like middle-aged men in their attic and darkly lit and ranting about whether you should have beans in your chili and getting angry about it. And I was just like, this is just fantastic. Like, because the whole time you're going, the real question is, what made you think, A, that anybody's going to be watching this, and B, that you knew so much about cooking that you had to express to other people? Like, there's like a whole phenomenon. So I was like, I got to start making these. And then I made one, and like every one of my friends said I had to make more. And then I made the second one, and it actually went viral. I got like several 100,000 views on it. And so I was like, okay, well, this might be like a future little career for me.
And so, how long have you had the show going
I
consistently
think it
now?
was 2011, and I was still very much into stand-up comedy at the time. So I did 8 episodes that had a great audience, and I killed myself off because I was like, I have to wrap these up because I want to go back out and do. I'm a road comic, so I can't sit here and do these kitchen videos. I wasn't making any money off of it. But after a few months, I missed it and I started making more, and I called them the lost episodes or whatever. And then I started noticing that people were showing up to my shows. This is a funny story, and this type of thing happened a lot. I was in Montreal, and they were pushing my show at the club the same way that they did all my shows. It was like, he's been on Jimmy Kimmel Live. He has a half-hour special on Comedy Central. You've seen him in clubs and colleges all over the country. And there was a picture of, there was an old picture of me there with the guitar or whatever. And there were like 5 French-speaking French Canadians that were coming up asking about the show. And the poor person at the ticket door was trying to describe me the best that they could, and it wasn't really working out. And I was just walking up, and I was behind. And then they go, "Oh, I've never heard of that guy." And then they turn around, and they saw me in person, and they go, "The kitchen guy. You're the kitchen guy. That's the guy. That's the guy I was telling. We got to watch the show." And they all pulled out money from their wallets, and 5 people went in. And I was like, "Oh, there's really something here now," because that I've never had that. I mean, I've done several late night things, half-hour special, Comedy Central, whatever. I've never had people that excited to see me except for this kitchen thing. So that was actually pretty cool. And I noticed it was everywhere, you know, it's like, and it was a different kind of audience, you know, it was like, it was younger people, um, not to be ageist, but people my age at some point just stopped going out to comedy clubs or something like that. And so it was exciting for me to see all these people showing up with their aprons and wanting me to sign them and stuff. I was getting recognized at the airport. It was kind of awkward because I remember being in Minneapolis wanting to fight with the gate agent about something with my flight, and somebody was standing there and they were like, "Oh, you're the guy from the kitchen video." And I'm like, "Well, now I can't be a dick, you know." But
Yeah.
yeah, that really caught me by surprise. But I kind of suddenly found myself like, "Oh, I'm in that new media that I keep hearing about. Now I got to make it work for myself." And the older I was getting, the more I was like, I can't go to, you know, the Midwest and in some small town for 5 days again. You know, there's a part of it I really love, but it was starting to really wear on me, the traveling, and it was just starting to take too much out of me. So I was like, well, maybe I can do this. So I started Patreon for it, and that's been working out pretty well. And then, yeah.
It is, I mean, I actually want to talk more about Henry's Kitchen, but I think you touched on something there, which is, the traveling, it does wear on you, and you don't often meet a lot of road comics who have been doing it for a long time. It's almost like there's this arc, it's like you're getting started and it's everyone's partying and you're very excited and you're younger, and then you like try to find some balance and like have it like the normal life, and then there's like a realization that that doesn't happen, and like it's like every road comic you meet after a certain point has just the most depressing, heartbreaking stories to give
Oh,
you.
yeah. Oh,
Like
absolutely.
if there's
Yeah. I
anything
mean,
that like will chase you off of it, it's sitting in a green room for someone you're opening for, talking about their like 3 divorces and their like 25-year-old son that doesn't talk to them
oh,
anymore.
yeah. No, even that first week that Stanhope took me out in '99, the big story was that there was a comic who was working at the other club who had just hung himself in his hotel room and with a shower curtain. And of course, I don't know why I added this shower curtain, but it's just kind of an interesting color to the thing. But in '99, I was 29. I showed up to Houston like a kid in a candy store. We did the morning radio. Doug was like wrestling with female wrestlers as part of a remote radio thing that was a promo thing. And I was like, this is fantastic. And there was in the background this story of this comic who had just killed himself. I didn't even feel that we laughed about it. That was it. I mean, we're all 29, and that was just a funny story, and we're making jokes about it and everything like that. It was so far removed, and yet that was one person's future, who probably was once 29, who showed up to this thing too. So it's really, there can be some serious darkness about it, and I've always liked having a dark sense of humor, so I've always tried to make light of those types of things. But it gets harder to do when you get older because you start knowing people personally that have been through these types of things. And yeah, no, at some point you have to put everything in perspective, because yeah,
And start a kitchen show.
exactly, yeah, and that makes
Which
other people want to kill themselves. Yeah.
which going back to you mentioned you use Patreon. Is that really how you monetize this? I mean, is that
Yeah,
how
no,
you
that's been really
make
good. When I do a video, I get paid for every video that I put out, and I do one a month. I mean, it's not good, and I'm not like going to be on Forbes anytime soon. But it's like I can pay some minimal amount of bills with that, but I also have to do all the other things. I was still doing gigs. Just about a month ago, I did Cape Girardeau, Missouri, a great club there. I hope they're doing okay. The Laughing Gas, and I like it, but just not as much, I guess, and but also I made a couple of independent films with a partner, and we the last one got on Showtime, so that aired a couple of years, and so I'm always trying to do a lot of different things. Currently, we're writing a third screenplay. That same partner of mine, and I have a new web series that I'm putting out on Patreon. I don't want to be Mr. Plug, but just in case I never get to it, it's called Patreon/Highwayman Show, and it's called The Highwayman, and it's a show about a guy who goes around and sees stranded motorists on the highway and tries to help them, but he has no idea what the fuck he's doing. Like, he doesn't know anything about cars or anything. So, and I have like a wig and everything. I'm trying to make it a direct spoof of that old show Highway to Heaven with Michael Landon. So, and if I don't raise the budget for it, I won't do it. But if I do, then it'll be another example of Patreon enabling me to do something that I wouldn't have ordinarily had to do. I guess the through line through all this is I'm not really counting on the mainstream entertainment industry to send me a lifeboat at this point. I did some acting on Silicon Valley, which was awesome. And if work like that comes in, then I'm like, yeah, that's great. But I think that we all have to fend for ourselves, like you with your podcast. It's like we have to do this kind of thing.
Do you prefer these kind of DIY projects versus going to work on Silicon Valley? Or I mean,
the honest answer is no. When I was showing up to Silicon Valley, I did like 7 episodes. Every time I showed up, I was like, this is the dream, and I was just getting a little taste of it. But I was like, you've got 50 people with walkie-talkies, and there's green screens, and there's people working, there's great food, fun. Everybody's in a good mood because they're working, and it's fantastic. So yeah, no, that work is pretty hard to compete with in terms of being fulfilling. The thing with the DIY stuff, though, is that you don't have to wait for the phone to ring, and you don't have to have somebody tell you that you can't say fuck, or if you want to do it, you can do it. And if you lose a couple audience members for it, that's a decision that you make as opposed to somebody else making it for you, which is really pretty nice.
Yeah, it's nice to control how you piss people off.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, yeah. No, I mean, I can't think of anything worse than if somebody gave me a speech to say that sounded like it was my own opinions and everybody hated me for it because the opinion, I don't mind if it's my own opinion, then I can take heat for it. But if I'm part of somebody else's project and it's pissing somebody off, I don't think I'd like that very much. It's like, I want to only take flack for the things that I want to stand up for, That's a funny little aside. I remember years ago I had to go into I don't know where I was. Let's say Pittsburgh or something like that, but I had to go in and do a sports radio station, and I just have never really been a big aficionado with sports, especially football. And so I called my buddy and asked if he could give me just some talking points, or just like, what types of things do you think that they're going to ask me? And I'd like to be able to answer them and not sound like an idiot. Well, I didn't realize the guy that I went to was actually someone who has very controversial opinions about sports, and very politically incorrect ones too. I think that Roethlisberger guy, who was supposedly a alleged rapist or whatever, came up, and I found myself having to defend all these ridiculous things that I said, and I didn't even have any convictions about them to begin with. So it was just like, yeah, that was the last time I asked somebody else if they could give me their point of view on something that I could repeat. But yeah, I should have just said, hey man, I'm not a big sports aficionado, but then they wouldn't have had me on the thing. So I don't know. But that was pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, so it is like a fine line. I think the experience I had recently was like I'm on Cameo, and someone purchased one of those little Cameo videos from me.
Oh yeah,
but it was like the video was for people that were volunteering for like a presidential candidate that like I was not supporting or necessarily agreed with.
Oh yeah,
and I had to and they gave me things they wanted me to say too, and I was like, all right, I'll say these, but I'm gonna
that's exactly it.
Yeah, I'm taking a red pen to this script and like inking shit in so I can try to like.
Oh yeah, no, and actors probably have to deal with that stuff all the time. It's just like,
Oh yeah.
I mean, we talked about the cats thing. It's just like, I mean, in a way, God bless them for doing that kind of work. It's like, hey, somebody else has a vision. I'm going to do the best that I can to try to get that vision across. But yeah, I would have a hard time separating myself from the material.
Well, I was reading something like last night about Whoopi Goldberg on an episode of Star Trek. There was some line that she was supposed to deliver, where she was like teaching like, someone about like sex,
Mm-hmm.
and the line was just like written from like a heterosexual perspective, and she like would not have it. She was just like, she's like, this is supposed to be in the future on a spaceship full of like aliens and shit.
Yeah.
She's just like, I'm not gonna sit here and just talk about like, the penis goes in the vagina. She refused it. She wrote the line herself and delivered it as like, like when two people wanna,
Oh,
rub their bits
she wrote
together.
an alternate line for.
Yeah,
Oh yeah, okay.
yeah, and she just delivered it, and it's what aired, and it's like to this day, like if you go and like stream it on Netflix, like that's what's in that show, and it's like
Yeah, and they probably, I don't know
it
what
is
the
interesting.
particular thing was, but they probably are grateful because their thing aged better than it would have. This isn't a politically charged example, but with our first movie, Punching the Clown, um, we had the youngest girl in the cast was, I think, about 18 or whatever, and we had her say a line about, oh yeah, it's all over my MySpace or something like that. And she's like, oh, you don't want to say MySpace. No, you want to say Facebook. And of course, the director and I are just like, all right, I've never used Facebook in my life. I have no idea what it is, but if she knows what she's talking about, then let's do that. And she bought us like 8 years with changing that one line, because it would have been 3 years later, people looking at that movie and going, what in the hell are they talking about? Or it would have just really dated it. And so sometimes an actor can jump in and say, yeah, no, you don't want to say this. Of course, I don't know what the specific example was with Whoopi, but I'm surprised because Star Trek didn't they're usually pretty ahead of the game in terms of all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, it was like I read it. I mean, yeah, Star Trek's a whole other thing, but yeah, I don't think it was like this homophobic Star Trek agenda. It's just
Yeah,
like
yeah. Just sort
just
of
like
a
an oversight in the
bump
90s.
against her. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and like she just being the actor and being Whoopi Goldberg was just like, yeah, I'm gonna correct it. But yeah, like your 18-year-old, like sometimes I think there's a thing for anyone who writes anything to like, especially like a film project, to start looking at it as like their project versus
Yeah.
a collaborative thing. And like anytime you have something that's collaborative, like you almost, I feel like it's going to improve. Whether it's an
Mhm.
18-year-old, telling you about the next big trend, or Whoopi Goldberg,
Oh,
checking people on
absolutely.
sexual politics.
It's totally true. Yeah. As a matter of fact, there is a little bit. I know I'm not the first person to say this. I might have read it somewhere, but it's so true. That if you have a boring part in your screenplay, give it to the most interesting person, and that sort of corrects it. And that's kind of what happened. We had this manager character in our movie that was just sort of a little bit of the stereotypical manager, but the lady that we got, Ellen Ratner, who did it, just put so much realistic life into that character that it became the best character in the thing. And so yeah, you can really rely on that sometimes. If you get the right person to do it, they'll bring something to life that wasn't really working on the page.
One last question before we wrap up here, and
Sure.
it's a total pivot, but I've taken to liking to ask everybody this.
Mm-hmm.
Throughout your whole body of work, throughout your whole life, what is the thing that you most want to convey to to anyone else?
You mean a particular project or just in general?
Just in general, like what's
Okay.
your What's kind of your driving North Star that you'd like to leave people with?
Um, it's a great question. I
I
so
like to ask people, I like to pivot abruptly to it because it fucks with people.
yeah, yeah. Well, the first thing that comes to mind is satire. I love taking something that's meant to be serious and being the guy who sucks at it, you know. Um, the movie The Party with Peter Sellers is so incredibly inspiring to me, you know. I People should watch that and watch what he does, you know, but also everything. I mean, just I love making people laugh. Like that's the biggest thing. And there's nothing like that thing where you're um, you know, if you're a comic and you're on stage and you're just having one of those particularly great nights where everything you say gets a giggle fit, you know, I wish every show could be like that. But I'm working toward the question, but like, or that feeling, or when I'm doing my videos and every now and then there's just some line that I can't get through because I can't keep a straight face because it's making me laugh, you know, those are the moments that I wish you could put in a bottle and keep, you know, for when you need them. Because um, to me, it's all about number one priority for me is making people laugh. Uh, um, yeah, I want to be the one who is trying to do the thing that everybody else is doing, but I'm not good at it, you know, and I'd like people to laugh that way. And I love it. Every now and then, I've never been a guy who appealed to kids whatsoever in personal life or in my act. You know, I mean, geez, it was pretty much the opposite of that. I remember parents getting upset with me, you know, after the shows and just saying, you're too dirty or whatever, you know. But now I've got all these friends that are telling me that they that their kids are watching my videos and loving them. And I got to say, I'm not upset to hear about that. I think that's really cool because, and they're telling me specifically what it is they're laughing at you because you're just a guy who sucks, but it makes them feel better. It makes them feel like, wow, I'm better than this guy, you know? So, I don't know. To me, laughter is everything. I mean, that's a pretty cliche answer for a comic, but there are some people that would say, I want to make people think, or I want to change people's minds about politics. And I'd love to do all that stuff too. It doesn't really seem to be something that I'm great at or my calling. But what I do seem to find as a thread through all of my body of work from the beginning is I'm really, really focusing on how you can turn those screws to get that response in people, you know. And sometimes it's a matter of timing, you know, just delaying what you're saying, or sometimes it's saying it really fast and moving on to the next thing. I mean, you know, there's so many little different ways to do it. But yeah, I mean, all these people are coming to mind from Chris Farley to you know, Mr. Bean, or you know, all these people who basically are just lovable losers, you know. I'd like to be one of those, you know, and that seems to be the through line for me.
It's a good through line to have. Well, thank you so much. It's Henry Phillips.
Yeah,
Tune
thanks,
in,
Alex.
tune into YouTube and watch Henry's Kitchen. Go on Patreon and fund the Highwayman Show. Thanks again, Henry.
All right, thanks a lot, Alex. I appreciate it.